What problem in product are you a little bit obsessed with right now?
There's kind of an epidemic of sadness. They all say, we wish we could modernize the way our company is working, but the company is traditional, it's top-down, the decisions are centralized, we're not empowered, we're not experimenting. I worked at Google for 6.5 years. Most of them spent in Gmail. I had a chance to see some big bad projects that went sideways. One very famous one is Google+. Died very slowly and very visibly.
Gmail's tabs became a global success. I cannot imagine my Gmail without that feature when I have to go through like 200 emails.
It turned into this massive project. Because we did so much testing, because we were so skeptical, I think a lot of companies should use and the combination of these things ends up with a very successful product.
Hey folks, welcome to another podcast episode of Product Founder. Today we have Itamar Gilad. Happy to have you on the podcast. We're joined by Itamar Gilad, one of the sharpest minds in evidence-guided product management. Itamar spent over 2 decades shaping world-class products at Google, Microsoft, and several startups. At Google, he was a product manager at Gmail, where he led the team that built the email categorization feature, the one that keeps your inbox organized to this day. He's also the author of Evidence-Guided Creating High-Impact Products in the Face of Uncertainty, and the creator of frameworks that product teams swear by, including the GIST framework and the confidence meter. In this episode, we dig into how to make decisions that actually drive impact, why most product bets fail, and how to de-risk them, how to bring true evidence-based thinking into your team's DNA. If you care about building products that work, not just products that ship, don't miss this episode. I want to ask you to kick things started. What problem in product are you a little bit obsessed with right now that you see on LinkedIn?
Hi, Amir. First, thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here. What am I obsessed with? I meet a lot of product people and a lot of product leaders, and there's kind of an epidemic of sadness, of melancholy among them, I have to say. They all say, we wish we could work in a better way. We wish we could modernize the way our company is working, but the company is traditional, it's top-down, the decisions are centralized, we're not empowered, we're not experimenting, discovering, and I really am trying to help these people move in the direction that they want to move. So this is my main focus.
1 or 2 years ago, you wrote a book called Evidence Guided. What was the exact, wow, we shipped a lot that didn't matter moment that nudged you toward writing the book? Let's pause here for a second. The other day, I was looking into our channel analytics and I noticed many of you guys are watching a lot of our episodes but not yet subscribed to our YouTube page or Spotify. I will ask you as a favor, please support us by subscribing to our YouTube page and Spotify page, and I will promise you I will do everything in my power to make each episode better and better. Thank you.
I'm telling the stories there in the first chapter. I worked at Google for 6.5 years. Most of them spent in Gmail. And I had a chance to see some big bad projects that went sideways. One very famous one is Google+. Google's big attempt to beat Facebook and actually launch its own clone of Facebook. And that was a massive, massive bet. Google kind of tore apart a lot of parts, reunited them, moved people, created this huge team inside Google. I think about 1,000 people or more, just with the sole goal of launching this big idea of the social network. And there were some open debates inside Google whether or not this is the right thing to do, but the leaders were very convinced. We have to have our own social network. It's crucial. They had a lot of good logic to explain it. And so we all worked on it, and me and Gmail and my team and all of us tried to contribute. There were integrations. There were a lot of things happening. And Google Plus was the main message that Google was giving its users. Everything you do, whether it's YouTube or Gmail or search, it will be connected to Google+. It will all be part of one thing. And there were some worrying signs because a lot of users didn't like this message. They said, we like each one of these products individually, but we kind of hated that you are shoving this new thing in the middle. We already have our social networks. We don't need another one. Thank you very much. And we heard this message, but we persisted because the idea was so important. This concept of the project that is so important that it cannot fail. So the founders, the leaders will keep pushing it forward. And Google Plus died very slowly and very visibly until it was terminated years later. And we had to unlaunch a lot of things to do with Google Plus. So for me, this was a learning. It showed me that even the smartest people, most capable people in the industry are susceptible to this fallacy of here's an idea, we just must launch. We have to, and it will succeed. We will make it succeed. Let's just do it. And of course, this is a huge example on a large scale, but I see this same concept being repeated again and again in every company. Here are a list of must-have features. Here's the strategy that is composed of this big bet. Just go ahead and do it. Don't challenge it. So I felt that there has to be a better way. This is creating a lot of waste in our industry. And the book and a lot of what I teach is actually kind of the opposite way, or not the opposite, but an alternative way to build high impact.
For me, the challenge is we have to have evidence to show a feature or the product we want to build, will succeed. But at the same time, there are a lot of projects or products that have been built throughout our lifetime that they keep trying, it failed. They keep trying, it failed. And some people were, quote unquote, visionaries. They pushed it forward until it became successful. So how should you balance as a PM or a founder to know when are you just pushing based on your opinion, or when can you have some evidence to prove that?
I think most startups start out this way. There's a vision. The founders are visionaries. That's really important. And they have to pursue their vision. But there's also a very famous book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And what this book explains is that it's great to have a vision, it's great to have a mission and a strategy, but you need to iterate, you need to test the assumptions, and doing this through build, measure, learn loops as fast as possible and kind of pivoting. Sometimes you need to change your big idea. That doesn't mean you give up on the strategy or on the vision or the mission. You just sometimes switch idea or improve the idea. Even a good idea needs iteration in order to maximize its potential. If you just build without testing your great idea and launch it, chances are extremely high against you that this is not going to work. You may have to iterate later on, which is much harder because the product is out there already, or you may be tempted to just call it a success and move on to the next project, which is what we call success theater. That happens a lot too. So the better way is to iterate before you launch, to perform what we call research and product discovery, two phases that are missing in a lot of companies. And that doesn't go against vision or mission. It's very important that we are visionaries. It's very important that we're stuck to our goals as well, or we commit to them, but doesn't mean that we need to, that's one-to-one as choosing an idea and just following it blindly.
I also heard that you talked about Steve Jobs and iPhone. He was not a fan of iPhone in the beginning, and even the iPhone, the product reshaped a lot over a period of time.
That's a perfect example of what I call strategy discovery. Apple, back in the day, in 2003, made half of its income from the iPod. So the iPod was a very, very important success for it. And the iTunes music store, so they needed to protect it, and there was a threat, an imminent threat, which was smartphones. So they looked for all sorts of ways to keep the iPod business alive, and while kind of dealing with smartphones. One of them was an integration with Motorola, launching a Motorola phone that had iPod capabilities with it. That didn't succeed. Another was to build an iPod that could also act like a phone. That wasn't very successful because of the interface. The third one was multi-touch, which was a project they started years earlier, and they kind of parked because it wasn't viable. They wanted to build a tablet. And then Steve Jobs kind of connected the dot, called the team and said, build me a multi-touch phone demo. They had to do 2 demos before he was convinced. And that's kind of how the iPhone came about. But all 3 of these activities actually contributed. Through the Motorola project, they formed a relationship with AT&T. And that was unique because AT&T allowed them to design the phone without intervention. Until then, the carriers, the providers, always intervened and kind of dictated to the vendors what to build. So in this case, Apple had a free hand to design it, which was very important for Steve Jobs. What they learned about the hardware from the iPod phone project really helped them. That team actually was converted to support the other team. And they also miniaturized OS X into what we know now as iOS. So there's a whole sort of flows converging to create this one perfect product. Of course, the story that Steve Jobs told to the outside world is that, like, This idea just came from his head. He just envisioned the whole thing, just told the team what to build. While in reality, initially he objected to this idea, but later on he let other people convince him to give it a go.
It's a very interesting story. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is that we always see the final product, right? We don't see the thought process and then the failure and how maybe that team or that founder, how they connected the dots. I think Steve Jobs said, when you look back, it's so easy to connect the dots and see how the dots were connected. I did this and then I end up going here, and because of that skill, I could build such thing. But it's hard to look at the future and pick the right dots.
Yeah, exactly. It's tempting to fall into this narrative of the visionary leader coming up with an idea, a breakthrough idea, then it's all execution. Maybe they run into some problems, but eventually it's the core idea that they started with that they launch, but that's rarely the case. And there's also a lot of misconceptions about how Apple worked under Steve Jobs. If you're interested, there's a really good book called Creative Selection. I don't remember the name of the author, but we can look it up later. And it explains he was part of this core team that built this interface, the new revolutionary multi-touch interface. And he kind of explains how things worked under Jobs. And it's really an environment that encouraged a lot of discovery. They did discovery. They didn't go and test with users because that was a kind of against their philosophy. But they tested internally a lot and they iterated a lot before the iPhone was allowed to emerge.
Why it was against their philosophy to test against the users?
That's an Apple thing. It still is today. When Steve Jobs, his company was acquired Next, and he kind of found himself back in Apple after being exiled for a few years. One of the first things he did was close the usability labs. They had like state-of-the-art usability labs with cameras and everything. And he said, we're not doing this. In Apple, we're not letting the users tell us what to build. They instead, and I haven't worked in Apple, so this is based on second-hand information. What they believe in is doing a lot of kind of prototyping, demoing, showing it to the leaders. And the leaders are these very unique people that have spent a lot of years in the industry, have a really good, strong sense of taste, and can kind of channel the users, in a sense. It's a very old school approach. This is how I started. My manager back in the day was exactly like that. I worked with him, not with the users. It's very risky. It works in a company like Apple because they developed the skill, but most companies don't have leaders like that, unfortunately. And you go up the chain of command, up to the leader, the senior managers, and demo to them, and they need to approve it. But then they do what in most companies is called dog fooding, and they have a different name for it, but it's basically giving employees early versions of the products to test for a long time and learning from that. So that's a very, very important technique that I think a lot of companies should use as well. And the combination of these things usually ends up with a very successful product.
That's very interesting. I remember in one of the stories you worked on the Gmail tab. Today, it's a very important part of the Gmail product, like the primary updates, socials, and promotions. And I remember in that story, you said that internally, a lot of your colleagues in Google, they already knew how to clean up their inbox. Right. So when they saw this feature, they were like, like that, why we need it, right?
Exactly.
But like when you built this and you published it, it became a global success, and it's with Gmail for a very, very long time. And I cannot imagine my Gmail without that feature when I have to go through like 200 emails all this time.
First, I'm glad to hear that you like it. And yeah, this is a clear example of the developers are not good representatives of the end users. When I came to the Gmail team, all of them were super advanced users. All of them were zero inboxers. They knew how to clean their inbox and use labels and rules and all the good stuff that Gmail offered to really be very productive with their email. It seems strange, but they assumed, or a lot of people assumed, that that's the correct way. What we need to do is teach the people, the users, casual users, how to do this. That was always kind of the mission. And I came and I was not a zero inboxer. I was a very lazy inboxer. And my email just piled up. And when I started working with the team, I told them, people don't think this way. And no one will ever use all of these fantastic tools. And they were like, well, how do you know? Why do you think so? And I came up with this idea, which was not the final idea. It was much worse. We improved it a lot since then. They said, we don't believe in this idea. And the managers too. And they said, we have all these tools inside Gmail and most of them are not used. Why would your idea be any different? So that forced me, to be very explicit about who are we targeting and what are the goals and what will success look like. So setting up goals and then starting with research. Like I was ready to go in and implement my brilliant idea, like exactly like this visionary founders. I thought I had a vision. I saw it clearly. And they said, no, you need to prove to us that this is actually needed, which the nice thing is that they didn't just say no. They just say, come with evidence. And they helped me. We did both qualitative and quantitative research, and both of them indicated the problem that I was pointing at was so severe, was so big. So many people had these overflowing, cluttered inboxes and didn't know how to deal with them, that we were not helping these people. And it was worthwhile building a project. So that's how I got funding. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then the next step was to build a very rudimentary version of this inbox and using it on our own personal email. In Google, this is called fish food. Before anyone else gets to use it, the team itself uses it. And then we saw there is value in it. Although I had to convince my colleagues to stop organizing their email like they used to work like a regular person. And that was a transition for some of them. But then they came back and said, yeah, this is really helpful. And then on, we continued in more and more of these steps. This is what I call a step, a validation step. We tested our assumption with more and more people in different ways. We iterated a lot on the interface, on the feature set. We expanded the project because we started with desktop, and then we expanded it also to the mobile apps. And it turned into this massive project eventually. But because we did so much testing, because we were so skeptical, we had a lot of evidence to show that this is actually a solid idea, that it's going to be a home run. And when we launched it, the launch was underwhelming because it was just nothing bad happened. People just accepted it, and it was really a very happy kind of launch, which unfortunately it doesn't happen that much. It's one of my only really successful launches I can say in my career. So that's when it clicked for me that this is actually the better method that I was looking for as compared to what I experienced before.
It's very interesting. One is opinion-led, the Google Plus, and then the Gmail tabs is fully evidence-based. You want to think that your idea is so great and you start to just go and start building it rather than doing a lot of research and making sure that there's a lot of evidence proving your idea will work.
I would argue the human factor is incredibly important. Human judgment has to play a part. I mean, the evidence will not tell you. Always the question marks, always good discussions, but the evidence-guided process that I and other people are suggesting structures the discussion and enables people to make good decisions instead of opinion-based or consensus-based or, gut feelings, whatever feels right to us. We're more likely. It just improves the odds. It doesn't ensure that you will have a home run every time, but it just greatly improves the odds that you will do the right thing. And that's one of the misconceptions. People think that if you're evidence-guided, if you run experiments, thinking is not required, but it's totally not the case. You need to sometimes think much harder. Now, actually, there's a third element. There's human judgment, there's evidence, and there's AI thinking. I think AI is a very good complementary tool that helps us with some of the deep thinking. It's something that now I'm starting to teach in my courses, for example.
If you could go back in time and rewind the Google Plus story, what's the very first thing that you would change?
I would go back to goals. I'm big on goals. The goal is actually to launch a new social. I would say, I think the goal is to make Google social. We're not a player in social. Everyone else is ahead of us. What can make us social? And then what are some metrics that will indicate that we're social? People sharing things. People are able to collaborate on things that are not just work, but actually also entertainment, other things. What can we do? And if we had this goal and then we kind of propagated this goal to the different product areas, to YouTube, to search, to Gmail, to all of these other areas, and gave it to them as a challenge, like come back with some ideas, detect some problems, detect some opportunities, come up with some ideas and show us what we can do. I think that would have maybe gave us a better chance to actually come up with something useful that the market really needed. And it's not just my feeling, because while we were working on Google Plus and investing, I don't know how many millions of hours of work, very close to Google in Mountain View, a small, much, much smaller team. I think less than 50 people sat in a much smaller and more modest office in a company called WhatsApp. And they were actually driving the change we were hoping. They were creating the threat to Facebook we were trying to create with a super modest messaging app. No frills, nothing too fancy, but it just caught on like magic. Then there was Instagram, and then there was Snap, and all of these other, Snapchat back then, all these other options we didn't consider. The mobile social was taking shape, and we missed this opportunity completely. And Google was in such a good position to actually capture on. So starting with goals, instead of dictating a big idea, coming up with an opportunity, with a goal, set of goals, and allowing people to discover what actually is the right answer, I think would have made a huge difference for Google.
It's so easy to now think back and be like, oh, that was a great decision. They could just acquire WhatsApp and it would be all over. But obviously, we weren't the team. Maybe in another multi-universe, Google Plus was a success.
Yeah, for sure. And I wasn't nearly senior enough. But I'm still seeing the same kind of thinking happen again and again. And now there's actually kind of a reversion even more into that. Because of AI, we need to run and launch stuff like crazy. Because there's something called founder mode, where it's back to the Steve Jobs model. Although it's not even the Steve Jobs model, it's much more primitive than that. Sorry, not primitive, but less modern, where the founder just tells everyone what to do. This is a thing that's happening right now too. So I see a regression rather than progression in the right direction, momentarily at least, right now.
Obviously, everything is changing now. We are in an interesting era. Half of the people are scared. Half of the people, they're the FOMO makers. AI just killed another startup. 1,000 more startups just died. I don't know. I think I'm one of the product managers chilling. I'm super young, but .com bubble, and then the whole mobile industry exploded. And then we had the IoT, and then we had the crypto, and then now it's just the fifth one, which is like AI. From this era, I would say a few things will stay, and then a few other things, I think it would just be history. For example, AI prototyping, I think that's one of the areas that it will stay. And it also makes sense that if teams are equipped with this ability of building a prototype, not necessarily I'm going to fire all my engineers and then I'm a founder making $1 billion company by myself. That no, but just really the AI giving you the power to test your ideas, build an MVP.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind that it's a start of a new era, in a sense. Like, we have this incredible set of tools now that talk like humans, understand humans, and display a lot of thinking and cognitive abilities we couldn't believe a few years ago that are possible. I think no one knows for sure how to use them yet. There's a lot of possibilities, there's a lot of hype, obviously, but I haven't seen yet the definitive way. And I'm mostly focused on product teams and the way they work. And usually there's 3 things you can do right now, or 3 ways you can think about this. One is to integrate AI in your product. And then there's this whole new class of AI product managers, which is definitely a skill. Like, you need to learn a lot, and you need to learn how to do evals and all these other things, and that's very important. The second is AI as a productivity tool. AI writing PRDs for you, or user stories, or helping you prioritize your backlog, or all of these other things. There, I'm pretty skeptical, because these things are not a goal. They're just artifacts, and they're a result of a lot of thinking and iteration. And actually producing the PRD should be a byproduct of discovery. It should be done with a team together. You don't want just to land on the table this complete polished document and say, hey guys, just build this for me. That's a terrible way to do it. I did it for many years, I can tell you, from my experience. So I'm not a big fan of that. There will be some elements of that, writing, prototyping, other things that maybe before were hard, it took time, will be faster. But I don't think we're going to see a huge reduction in the number of product managers because of that. I think that's just hype. The third one is the one I'm most excited about. And that's AI helping us change the way we work. You asked me initially what I'm most excited about. It's helping product teams modernize, helping them drive the change in the organization towards more research, more discovery, better goals, better product strategy. These things are missing, better culture. And I have all sorts of ideas how AI is actually an enabling technology for these exact things. And I think that's an area that's not explored quite enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to your book, and I want to have a quick premiere for the listeners. You developed a framework called GIST, goals, ideas, steps, tasks. Can you a little bit share more about it and how does it work?
Yeah, for sure. So there are a lot of framework out there for what I call evidence-guided development, and the book is based on a lot of ideas and models that came from people much smarter than me. It's just kind of a formalization of the thing that we used in Google. You remember that story about the tabbed inbox? Later on, I formalized what did we do there, and I recognized that we did things different in 4 areas. First, goals. Working towards concrete outcome-based goals, as cliche as this sounds, is really hard and not practiced very, very often. And I find this a problem. This is a problem in many, many companies that I meet. So how to set up goals correctly, how to connect the goals of the company with the goals of the teams, how to do cross-team alignment, all of this good stuff. That's the first part of the book. Then we need to talk about prioritization. I mean, there's research and there's finding opportunities and challenges, which is not described in the book. But from the goals, if you have these things, you can go into ideas. And ideas are hypothetical ways to achieve the goals. And the question on the mind of a lot of product people is how to pick the right ideas, how to make bets, how to prioritize. So in the book, I explain how you can use ICE, not delegate the decision to some spreadsheet, actually use ICE as a guidance to ask the right questions. The questions are what is the impact, what is the ease, and how confident we are. And for me, confidence comes from evidence. I'm including a tool called the confidence meter that explains that if you just have opinions, the confidence score should be extremely low. If you did some numbers on the back of the napkin, you have a little bit more confidence. If you interviewed a few customers and some of them said, yeah, great idea, that gives you a little boost of confidence. If you did a usability test, that's a little bit more. If you did a long-term longitudinal study with an MVP, much more confidence. Did an A/B test, even more, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of guiding you to pick the ideas, not just based on what you think, your opinions, but also what the evidence suggests. If you don't have the evidence, you need to test, which is the next layer, steps. Steps are actually anything we can do to validate the assumptions in the ideas. Steps are what we do during the product discovery phase. A step can be as simple as that analysis on paper. It can be as complicated as a full beta for 3 months. These are all steps in my book. The thing is that they teach us something about the idea and they help us improve it. And sometimes they teach us that we don't need to launch this idea. It just doesn't work. And the last layer is tasks. Tasks is actually about working with agile teams, how to connect this to their reality, because I find a lot of agile teams are actually geared towards delivery. It's like, we don't care actually what we build, as long as you tell us exactly what to build, that's our job. And that's a really bad mentality, I think. And it's not their fault. It's just we push them into this niche over the years. That's not how I started as an engineer, and that's not how any engineer needs to work. So I explain in the book how to bring the engineers out of it and help them become part of the discovery, help them become aware of the entire stack, the goals, the ideas, the steps, and how this actually liberates them and makes them much more happy at work, and also reduces the pressure on the PM to generate a ton of specifications and user stories. Then later on in the book, there's other chapters explaining how this works in B2B, B2C, startups, scale-ups, etc., and how many objections you will run into and how to deal with them. So that's the last chapter.
Can you give me a practical example of all these steps? You have an idea, that's a hypothetical idea or a feature. How would it look like in all these 4 steps?
Right. So let's say you have two ideas on the table and they both look promising. Some people say this is for sure the best idea. We need to launch this. Some people say that. You can sit in a room and convince each other with logic and opinion forever, but there's no new information that is generated from this discussion. It's just logic and opinions. So instead of agreeing through consensus, you decide to do a few things. Step number 1 is maybe just the PM and the engineering lead and the UX designer just guessing the impact, confidence, and ease for these 2 ideas. And you would be surprised that this exercise that takes maybe 3 minutes completely changes the discussion. Because once you start thinking, what is actually the impact on the metric that you're trying to improve with this idea, sometimes your thoughts are a little bit better organized. But it's still guesswork. It's still, you didn't generate new information. Then we say, all right, let's go and interview some customers. That's a step. Let's check if they have the problems. Let's maybe show them a paper mock-up, static, of the 2 ideas, then come back. That teaches us a little bit more. In the same time, the PM may do a competitive analysis. How many of our competitors are trying to solve this problem? How many of them are doing it in the way that we're trying to do? That doesn't mean it's bad or right or wrong, but it's another step. It gives us a little more data. Maybe let's launch a survey. All of these are cheap things. They're not expensive. So within a few days, you're usually in a place where you can eliminate one of these ideas. Sometimes you have more than two, so you need to eliminate fast. But then you're left, let's say, with a few potentials. So then you're willing to invest a little bit more and say, all right, let's do a usability study with a prototype. Or let's build a fake door test. We just enable them to kind of opt into the feature, but the feature doesn't exist. Or a concierge test. These are early tests where you're faking the idea before you're actually making it. So it's still cheap. It's not as cheap as before, but it teaches you much more. It's on a much higher level of confidence. And then the big question is, when do you stop? Because a lot of people feel, wow, if we do this for every idea, then we'll never launch anything. It really depends on two things: the size of the idea and how much risk you see in it. A small and not risky idea, like, I don't know, changing the font in the settings page, if the designers think it's a good idea, just go with it. You don't need to test it necessarily. The risk is minimal. The amount of effort is minimal, and just do it. But if it's a small idea and there's some risk, you're changing the payment flow, and it might actually hurt money, jump directly to an A/B experiment. It's a small idea, build it in full, but test it. Don't be tempted to launch it just because it's easy and to do a 100% launch, which is not really a test. If it's big and risky, you want to take your time because you don't want to jump into the heavy investment, the commitment to the idea too early. You want to give yourself more and more opportunities to learn and to improve the idea, and gradually you commit more. It's really risky to commit early because once you commit, it's really hard to change. It's like the team is working on it, we have plans, we're going for it, so rolling the clock back is very hard. But if you're just in early stages, it's easier to say, well, we have better ideas, so let's not do this one. So I hope I helped you. This is kind of an example of things might work.
Yeah, thank you. No, that definitely makes it more clear. I want to ask a follow-up question. So if you had to pick one habit a product manager should build this month to become more evidence-guided, what that would be?
One habit. I was approached as a product manager all the time with ideas from the CEO, from stakeholders, from everyone. And they all were convinced that their idea is the best. It's really a must-have. There's nothing to debate. We talked to 3 customers. They all said the same. Let's just go with it. And in hindsight, I wish I could be more open with them and admitting that I'm not convinced, that we need to have stronger evidence with that. And that's why I created the confidence meter, by the way, this tool that gives a score. And a lot of people actually are using the confidence meter in this way. They're pulling it out and say, thank you for the idea. Thank you for sharing what you know. That puts it at 0.5 out of 10 based on this tool that this guy created. And it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean it's a great idea. It's just we don't know enough to commit to this idea. If you want, we can test it. If you want, we can go further. And that's usually a discussion that people can relate to. It's not pushing back against them. It's not making them feel they're stupid. It's not a battle of opinion where you say, in my opinion as a PM, you are wrong. If you do this, you will lose because the senior person will always win in a battle of opinion. But if you use evidence and you say, we need more evidence before we commit, that's the way we work, you are in a much better position to actually create more impact, more value, instead of just chasing must-have ideas that come from here and there.
You have been a product manager for quite a long time, and you also worked at Microsoft as well. You have a very strong resume. I want to ask, is there any belief that you held for a very long time as a product person that you have changed in your mind?
I would say many. One of them is that the PM needs to predict the future. Needs to be just like this oracle that can create 150-page PRD, product requirements document, that explains in fine detail exactly what the product that we launch 18 months in the future will do. And that was the time scale in Microsoft at the time. And that's what was the expectation. Today, we call this false predictability. It's just faking it. But back then, we played a part. That was the job role, to invent the future, to be this visionary person. Based on some market data that we had, some market research, based on discussion with the engineers, but Basically, it all mostly came from our head. So today I would feel very queasy to do such a thing. And luckily, all this other theory came along to improve. Another one is this notion of the CEO of the product, that I see sometimes that the PMs feel that they're like the grown-up in the room. They need to kind of guide, project manage other people, get them to do the work, spoon feed them, kind of give them everything. And that's also, I feel, not super healthy. The engineers are adults. They can do a lot of things. They don't need a tremendous amount of structure. It's more about kind of removing some of the expectations, like that they will be measured on delivery. They have to complete the sprints, the story points in the sprint. If you remove all of these things and say, guys, it's not about that. It's about achieving the outcomes that we as a team have committed to. And here's the process. They like this process much more. They are very scientifically minded. They like the evidence model. They like to work with PM in this way. It's much more liberating for them, much more fun. So stop being the CEO of the product as well.
I personally feel the second one a lot. You have to chew the food for the engineers. I personally do that because there's a lot of pressure from the top that we need to ship faster. And you want to be helpful, so you're like, okay, let me think instead of the engineer read the technical document that what I'm asking is actually doable, rather than asking them, can you go like check if this is technically feasible, just to make that sure. I personally do that, but I think it doesn't really help, because if an engineer wants to spend some extra time, if the performance is not the best, time that I save will be wasted on a development of a feature that could take 2 weeks, but instead it's happening 4 weeks. So I didn't necessarily help.
During the research and discovery, the PM is the active entity and the engineers are helping. They're like supporting the PM in kind of doing the discovery, but they're very important in the process themselves. During the delivery, the engineers and the designers are much more the center of focus, and the PM is a support function, in my mind. And then it's okay if you jump in and you try to do things for them to expedite delivery, but it's much easier if you already did the discovery and everyone has a big understanding of what's the problem and what's the idea, and we already worked on it a little bit. So in that scenario, they don't need you to tell them every pixel what color it has to be and what the dialog box has to do exactly. They understand. Sometimes they do it and they show it to you. And they say, we designed it this way. What do you think? I think that at least 50% of what I launched with my team at Google is not stuff that I ever specified. I didn't think of it. The engineers and the designers came up with it. They called me. They said, what do you think? And most of the time it was brilliant, much better than I would have been able to invent. And sometimes I pushed back and said, I think this is missing the goal. Maybe we can do it a different way. But it was a much better kind of relationship than one side always specifying and the others are just like fulfilling the spec.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Well, it's been a wonderful episode. Is there something that you would like to share with the listeners? Maybe an article recently you wrote or your newsletter or something that we could put the link down in descriptions for them to check?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. If you want to kind of being updated about my thoughts about these topics of AI, the product operating model, product discovery, there is my newsletter, which is simply itamargilad.com/newsletter. And along with that, you'll get a lot of my tools and my ebooks and templates. So I think that's one of the best ways to keep in touch and learn. The other option is to consider reading my book, Evidence Guided, which includes everything we talked about in much more detail.
We will make sure that we put all the links in the description. I want to thank you again for joining this wonderful podcast episode.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was a pleasure.
Wow, you made it till the end. I'm very proud of you. Comment down below which part of the podcast did you like the most and who should I interview next. Also, on the screen, you will see a lot of our other great episodes that you should definitely check out.